Welcome to the Happy Sensory Corner in Special Education podcast, where we ask the leaders in special education to share their insights and experiences to better understand how to support students in special education, but also the teachers. And the focus at the moment with these episodes is going to be on reducing the use of restraints. Before we start our interview, I'd like to introduce our guests. And our first guest is Janalee Goodrich, who is the Special Education Director at the Duchesne County School District in Utah. Janalee is going to be our first guest who has also participated in not just our training program, but also our curriculum of custom brain stimulation activities. Welcome to the podcast, and thank you for being on the show, Janalee.
Thanks, Kim. Happy to be here.
We are also here with Claudie Pomares, the creator of sensory enrichment therapy. She's the Chief Science Officer at Mendability, where we provide a unique program called sensory enrichment. And it's an evidence-based brain stimulation program to improve the behavior regulation and learning abilities of all students, but especially those who struggle the most. And Claudie will be doing a short training on a sensory enrichment protocol at the end of our interview. So stick around. And as for me, I am Kim Pomares, CEO at Mendability. Christine, our host for the podcast, was not available for this episode. And for those of you who are paying attention, yes, I have the same family name as Claudia, and that's because she's my mom. So to start with, Janalee, tell us a little bit about what inspired you to get into special education. What's your why?
Well, my why came in a unique way. Everyone has a journey in their careers, right? I had just graduated with my degree in elementary education. And I live in a small rural town, and the only position that was available at the school in our town was a special ed position. And as amazing enough, 30 years ago, we had the same problem we have now, and that is staffing special education. So I was hired just before school started that year to be a special education teacher. So it was kind of immersion by fire. I learned a lot really fast, had great mentors that I worked with, and that was the beginning of my journey in special ed. So started with special ed, started seeing progress with the hardest kids and the ones that the teachers in the classroom were so frustrated with. And with some strategies that I tried, I was able to have some success with them. And that was so fulfilling for me. So long story short, I taught SPED for 5 years while I worked on my second bachelor's in special education. Just completed that. And in the process of that, I went to 2 other schools. And those were other situational kinds of things. And at the time, I thought it was the most difficult thing I had ever done, but it was the most fantastic experience ever to be in different towns and different schools and see the environment and the work that you could do with kids. So then my opportunity to come back to my hometown happened to be a first grade position. So finally had the special ed degree, and I went back to general ed. But it didn't take long for me to learn that my role as a general ed teacher was also fulfilled in a special ed world. I happened to be the lucky one that they always gave those hard behavior kids to, and those kids who were really struggling to learn to read. And I worked closely with them and the special ed teachers. So I learned how to collaborate there to best meet the kids' needs. And again, I've always been kind of drawn to those hard kids who need a little extra. After 12 years of teaching first grade, I became the principal of this hometown school. And I spent several years there doing all the things that a school principal does. Went to a high school for 2 years. And within that time of going to the high school and my principalship, I was injured significantly and gained a different perspective for a disability, because when you're in those shoes and you're learning to walk again and you're navigating the world from the position and the perspective of a wheelchair, your perspective and your empathy changes. Fortunately enough, I have healed and I'm on my feet, literally. But now, as I'm the special education director, I just feel like I have the deepest empathy and the deepest understanding because of my own experiences and my work with the kids all across the ages, that I'm able to really work well with families and kids and meet their special needs. And so what it is that was my inspiration is I just learned to love and become fulfilled by helping kids with special needs. It just fills my bucket. Even now, if I get a chance to get out of the office, I'm right into a classroom where I can be around those kids because it just makes me happy.
It's an inspirational why.
It's a long journey of a why, for sure.
I loved your wheelchair experience. What was it that was difficult in a wheelchair that you learned to appreciate when you got out of the wheelchair?
You know, a couple of things came really to light at that point. My first experience, I spent 30 days in a physical rehabilitation center working on the physical and the occupational therapy that I needed to be able to, one, begin walking, and two, be able to immediately navigate things like my home and those kinds of things. And so, you just go to the kitchen and grab the things that you need and cook dinner. And I remember the first experience that I had with my occupational therapist. She wanted me to choose one of my favorite dishes to cook. And I had to create my shopping list just like I was at home. And she took me out and we went to a Smith's that was near the hospital. And that whole experience became so overwhelming for me. One, getting in and out of the vehicle and managing the wheelchair in transportation was hard. And two, you get into the grocery store and you don't even think about it when you're able to just snag what you need and you're in and out of the store pretty quick. And for me, that day felt like the shopping was the longest journey of my life because I couldn't reach the things that I needed. I had to use an assistive technology, those nice little grabbers, or I had to work to stand myself and be able to get that. And having that experience and then taking the ingredients back to the hospital and preparing something in that kitchen was so eye-opening to realize how just by changing your surroundings and how you organize your materials in the kitchen went from an impossible task to a doable task. And I think that perspective helped me realize how much the environment around people with disabilities is so important and can be so minimal in fixing. For example, I had an amazing occupational therapist, and she talked to me about my cupboards and things in my home. And I realized that I had a lot of things that I use a lot up on an upper shelf. And so we worked on, the plans for moving those things to the next shelf, and also how to be able to get them all off the shelf easily and be able to navigate that. And it was just huge.
When you said going to the store felt like the longest and most frustrating experience of my life, I saw students who are also asked to learn something, and their day at school sometimes is the longest and most frustrating experience of their life. How did this appreciation for the longest day of your life, how do you communicate that to your special ed team so that they empathize with the students who are having the longest day of their life?
One of the things that I have just really tried to do with my teams is when they give me a call, because as the director, I don't even get involved until they're really hard, right? I'm the last one that gets that phone call. When that phone call comes in, I often try to slow them down and just ask, okay, so what are the kids' strengths and what can we do in their environment to help them navigate those things? And I think we've made some real gains with that. Kim, you're familiar with our school setup. We have a special school, which is where we have introduced Mendability and the sensory enrichment. But we also have special classes that are cluster classes for our district. For example, we have one right now that's for 18 to 22-year-olds, our transition kids. And sometimes just that communication with parents saying, listen, I think they can handle this less restrictive environment if we do these specific things to change that environment. And as we've transitioned kids into this classroom, into a less restrictive environment, we've had great success. That's actually when we talk about programs and systems, that's one of the things that I'm really excited about, that we've made some difference.
Cool. Let's talk about reducing restraints. It's a big deal, obviously, for many of, if not all, the special education directors we've spoken to. What can you tell us about reducing restraints in your district? Is this an issue that you track? How do they affect your team of teachers?
You know, we do some trainings. We have some specific protocols of when we can restrain and what to do besides restraining. Talk a lot about de-escalation. We talk a lot about if a kid's out of control in the classroom and it is feasible, leave the kid there, not unattended, of course, but move the other kids so that they are out of the way and that they are not in harm's way, and do everything you can possibly do, again, to the environment before you have to restrain that kid. A little story and a little kick for Mendability. Just this last week or so at Connemore, we had a student who was melting down and was escalated. And as they did this process, the person who is doing our Mendability enrichment activities came in with an ice pack because they knew that was something that was calming, and was able to reduce those behaviors and go right back to work with this student. So I feel like there are strategies and tactics that are absolutely doable, and it can reduce those restraints or even eliminate, which is my goal, is to eliminate. Probably what people would say, I say most of all, is don't touch the kiddos, kind of like don't feed the bears, but don't touch the kiddos. That should be our very, very last thing we do, is restrain a kid. And it only should be if the child is in harm's way or others are going to be hurt.
So, I mean, obviously, we give part of our training was to give you this meltdown management protocol. But what else have you tried over the years to help your students with behavior issues?
You know, we've done some social skill training. I don't know, I feel like we've tried all the textbook type things with our kids with behavior. We've tried some isolation. We've tried all the things that don't work and then some. As we have kiddos who have those behaviors, we really just try to work through what the function of that behavior is and build a plan that can be consistent in all the environments that they are involved with. Has it worked? Sometimes, other times maybe not so much, but as a whole, our behaviors in our district are manageable.
So how did you tell us about the last? Let's do the successful one, because I mean, sometimes we learn more from failures than we learn from our successes. So I do want to hear about maybe the last program you brought in that was less successful than you expected. You know what? Let's do that. Let's start first with the last program you brought in that was not successful, and what was the problem you were trying to solve, How did you introduce it to your district, and what you feel were the challenges or the failures of the system, or was it a failure of the program?
So do you mind if I just talk about our journey with Mendability?
Sure.
Because I feel like that was one that I met with Kim, was excited about it, could see how it could have impact. But as I introduced it to my staff, it was in the middle of a year. They were already overwhelmed. They didn't latch onto it like I had hoped that they would. It just became that one more thing. So I felt like the way that I rolled it out and the expectation I set was not maybe the best. And part of that was because I didn't have the system set up to handle the extra work and the different processes. So the following year, we assigned a teacher to be the lead teacher with Mendability. Well, as everyone knows, a classroom teacher is busy, and she did great things. I feel like that year we made progress, but they were baby steps, and it was mostly only in one classroom. And to be honest, it wasn't a consistent implementation. It was very spotty. Kim, I think you would agree with that. We did great with like a sensory start. All of the classes implemented that. But as far as that one-on-one work that worked with students, we definitely could have done better. So here we are in our second and a half kind of year. And we have found that by allocating the correct resources, which right now for our special school is just one aide that is there bell to bell. She's the one who's taking charge of this with the individual students, and she's discovering what works for them. The neat thing that she has shared with me is that she has had opportunity where she would be in a classroom and she would be working with one of the students while other students were melting down. And she politely has asked the teacher or another aide, hey, can I take over for a second? And she's able to implement some kind of a sensory enrichment activity with them. And before long, everyone's working. Maybe not at the highest level yet, but they are working. And, we have to seat the kids before we can teach the kids. And that's been significant. So that's kind of where I started with kind of a system failure, to be honest. And now through learning by doing, here we are. And I feel like we're finally making some progress. And I feel like there's a lot of ownership coming into those practices. And I feel like that's a huge thing in order for the success of it.
So if we wanted to be practical for a second and remove sort of mendability from the equation, but if you wanted to give some advice to other special education directors who are getting really excited about a program, they know it's going to work and it's going to be great, what would you do now differently?
So what I would do now is I would take a step back and try to control my own excitement of, oh, this is going to be good, let's get it going, and really work with the school or the teachers, whatever environment needs the most work. And I would actually really slow it down and think through what the system needs to do to support no matter what program it is. And, we can talk about different programs, whether it's academic or behavior, all day, of programs that we have implemented that maybe are not as effective as we would like to be. But what I've learned through these processes of implementing these is you really have to make sure you have your system set up. Make sure you have scheduled time to work through setting it up, making sure that the resources are there and available in order for it to be effective.
What would you want to make sure your system has in place?
A typical school or a special school has to have a priority of scheduling. So, for example, if Mendability is important to us and we want it to be a priority, we need to build that into our master schedules so that time is set aside. And then we need to have the plan of, okay, there's the time. Who who's going to do it? It's kind of that who does what by when kind of thing. And I think just being so specific and detailed in that process is best.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Tell us now about a program that was the perfect shoe-in right away. Did that ever happen?
So as I thought about that, I am more of a strategy, and I've mentioned before changing environments, that kind of thing, person versus really a program. But in the continuum of special education services, we always look for the least restrictive environment. And as I went into this role, I felt like we had a population of students in our special schools that really could be integrated into a less restrictive environment. So one of the things that I've done since I've been director is start some special classes that are located in the same age, with the same age peers in their schools. So for example, we have a special class in an elementary, in a junior high, and in a high school. And we're starting to do just some other smaller ones in our rural, even more rural than where we are here in town, schools, because they're finding that it's so effective. But by creating these special classes, we have seriously made a life-changing impact on some students. I have a kiddo who lives in my community, and so I felt pretty comfortable talking with that parent right off the bat. And I said, listen, I just think there's so much more that he could do that could get him ready to be independent and be able to be employable and all those kinds of things as he transitions. So I kind of convinced her to let him come to our special class. So he left our special school, came to our special class a year ago, and he just started to thrive. He is communicating more. He wants to go out more. He's interested in spending his own money and all those kinds of things. The challenge with this special class is that this particular student has to ride the bus it isn't almost. On a Friday, he is on the bus in the transportation from his home to this school longer than he's actually at school. And that bothered me because I felt like we wasn't using that day. So I found businesses in the town that he lives in who were willing to let him come work on Fridays. So it was kind of a charge of my own that I did to get them into their own community, because I felt like that was the next step in helping them transition. So by doing that, we've had this little guy just since the beginning of this school year. Little guy, and he towers over me, but he'll always be a little guy. Anyways, he works in 2 businesses in our town, and he is having lunch and 1 class period with other students in the high school there. And the turn recently has been that he told his mom, who always thought this student would be dependent on her and living at home. He told his mom around Thanksgiving time, he said, I don't want to go to school anymore. I want to move out and have a job. And this poor mom was just blown away because she never thought that was it. But how exciting is that? He advocated for something that he's learned that is exciting and good for him. So I don't know. You can tell this really excites me because I this
is great. Now I'm thinking, who else are you going to do this with?
I'm going to get my hands on anybody I can. It's so
obviously important. You need some flexibility. You need to be able to say, okay, there's this on paper, school is great, but for this particular situation, let's change this. So are there other places where you're thinking, this is the model, but this kid breaks the mold. We need to do something different. And where do you draw the line between, because if you start doing this with everybody, I'm excited and nervous all at the same time, but this is such a wonderful story.
Me too. And this has kind of been, I have to tell you the last little bit. So when he told her that, then they've started working with a vocational rehab person and our adult living community group in our area. And at the end of the school year, he will be finishing high school with a certificate of completion. He has not earned the credits for, a traditional diploma, but here we are, a kid with intellectual disabilities who is finishing with a certificate of completion. And in June, he will be moving out and he will have a job every day of the week, a couple hours a day. So he'll have his own income and he will be living in kind of a group home, but independently of his parents. And she just applied for a job with us. And she said, I've got to find my own identity now because my whole life has been spent on caring for this child who now wants and is ready for his independence. So when you say you have to, what are you going to do about these kids that need to break the mold of the system? My thinking on that, the initial thought I had is we truly need to bring the I back into IEPs. And as I say that, I believe that we do our best to make them individualized, but sometimes we need to get creative about what we can do. And I think we also really have to have those conversations with families about what the kids want. And if the kids are verbal and able to do that, I mean, we never dreamed we would get this kind of advocacy for this young man. So it's pretty exciting.
In another episode, one of the directors said sometimes we handicap the children further by supporting them.
Yep.
And you need to find that balance where you're there and supportive, but you don't handicap them.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing that in what you're saying. And I remember the first time I heard this from a special director, I felt, ooh, what does he mean? Ooh, that sounds bad. So how do you, I imagine I'm not the only one who has this initial reaction of the less you support them, the more you support them. How do you explain that? How would you explain that on this episode in a really cool way for our audience?
Well, I don't know if it'll be a really cool way, but you talked about how as you can see the need to almost simulate the programs that you introduce. I think in some ways our life skills classrooms and just any of our special education classrooms, we need to be almost pre-teaching them and setting up the skills that we need them to do. For example, this little guy got his start of being able to face the shelves in a grocery store by the teachers created just a few shelves of grocery items and has a place for them to be. So they've learned to look at the barcode and match them up in the right spot and pull them all forward and those kinds of things. So we kind of simulated a grocery store shelf and we practice the skill and we help them with that. And I think when we know what their goals are for transition, we preload that. We pre-teach and we get them prepared before we ever put them in that different environment. And then with this young man, I was with him every Friday for the first couple of months. I made sure that either me or one of my people were with him the whole time. Then we brought in some peers from the high school and they started supporting him and we started stepping back. Mm-hmm. And now when we get to those stores, we still have someone with them, of course, but that person just checks in on them every so often because they're independent, they know. And so it's that gradual release of responsibilities that we support them a lot in the beginning of the learning of the new skill, whether it's a life skill or whether it's an academic skill. And then we fade our support until they're independent. And as special educators, we're not great at that because we want to be there and make sure they're successful and never let them fail. And we do kind of hold them back when we can't release that control.
It's funny. It's actually an anxiety on the part of the teacher that we've identified.
Yes, my teachers do get stressed. But as soon as you see something so magnificent, it's hard to not just get excited.
Claudia, you must be full of ideas. Where Where are we going to do the training today?
Well, it's hard to even decide because there is so much. But I want to share something that goes with your story of giving his life back to that kid, and a comment that Kim made, and you confirmed that we tend to protect the kids so much that we prevent them from doing. And I work with a family who has a 22-year-old who barely speaks. He may have 3 words, and he's very passive. But because he's very tall, people are very cautious around him. But he's served constantly. He doesn't do anything for himself. And recently I've been implementing a few things, and one of them, which is something that a lot of parents and maybe teachers are facing, which is an obsession with a device. And so he has this iPad, and he would only look for 10 seconds, swipe, and look a third. He had only those 3. So I asked the person who worked with him, okay, make a video of only 10 seconds of the game and have the screen ready as if it was working, but in reality, all the buttons are mute. They don't do anything, because I wanted to understand the boy. And so they made a video for me, and when he did his using, tapped, and then looked at the teacher or the person working with him, and his facial expression was saying everything. I know how this thing works. What have you done to make it different? From that point, I was able to bring some changes and do exactly what you're doing, is gradually get him to take over his own life, like go get your own plate, go get your own class. And the school has implemented something that you mentioned, and I can talk about it a little bit. It's not really a training because, well, I'm not sure that we have done the meltdown protocol in the trainings, but
It's fine to repeat it.
Yeah, the wonderful thing about this training and this protocol is that it works even if you don't do Mendability, sensory enrichment every day, if you just do that. So the school started to do the strawberry and ice protocol, which is having an ice pack or having something really cold, ask the kid to hold it when they are losing it. And when they are losing it, we know they are overwhelmed. There's no way we cannot talk to them about why are you that way? It's done. That's why we talk about restraint, because if they are 22 and are 6 feet tall, there has to be a solution, and the solution works. Holding something really cold is having an impact instantly to the brain, because whatever was going on in that brain that is overwhelmed, suddenly the brain says, okay, we need to protect that person. It's a dying situation. And it's a reality, a reflex response where the brain calms everything in order to react to the very cold. The very cold is held only 2 seconds. And at the same time, we have that scent. And strawberry is a scent of choice because research tells us that out of all kinds of different smells that they have measured with fMRI, which is pictures of the brain as people are doing something, they found that the scent of strawberry reaches the amygdala faster than any other scent. And so the amygdala is the rage place. It's very tiny inside the brain, and it's just near the olfactory bulb where the smells are processed. So associating, holding very cold for 2 seconds and smelling brings down everything. And now you can talk to that kid, or now you can proceed to maybe the next thing that you would have done, but you need less energy and less staff to make it happen. And so that classroom has done the strawberry and ice protocol with that big kid who typically was passive, and people who take him for walks now say he is looking at the trees, picking up leaves, looking at them, where he was just a zombie, sort of. And he's taking over, going to get his own clothes in the morning, like what you have seen. independence doesn't happen in a minute, but if we give the tools, if we help that brain figure out that life is not as horrible as it feels, and gradually learn and get the joy of, wow, I own my life. Your story is an example, and I hope millions of principals and directors will listen to it and know you can do that. And in the end, the kid made the decision, right? You prepared, you worked, you made it happen, but in the end, you had done enough for his brain to be able to enjoy and make a decision. But you have done more than that. You changed the family. Like this mom who had decided, I have no life, I'm nobody, I'm just a helper. But hey, I have my life. I can do something. So, and that.
Claudia, I've got tons of questions.
Yeah.
But before I ask my questions about the training you've just done to go a little bit deeper and be a bit more practical, Janalee, do you have some questions for Claudia?
Gosh, let me think.
Okay, you think, and
Okay,
because
great.
I can ask my questions then. First of all, in the meltdown management protocol using the Santa strawberry and the ice, it's pretty clear. You give the kid the ice to hold, and I've heard it from many teachers. The kids don't have an issue with being handed something cold and holding it. They don't question it. You just do it. But they find it very intrusive to just say, "Hey, smell this. Hey, smell this." So one of my the best. The school, one of the teachers in the school found that if they put it in a spray bottle and spray it above or around the child, is that enough for them to experience the scent?
If the spray is strong enough that the teacher can smell it, the kid can smell it. And breathing is enough. So, in fact, most children, to not say all children, because scientifically it's not appropriate to say all, most children on the spectrum or with learning disability don't know how to sniff. And their brain does not have that function. So, by breathing, it's plenty. And I'm happy that you mentioned that we spray above so that it sort of rains a beautiful scent, or around. Never, ever, of course, spray directly towards the nose. That would not be good at all.
The other question were more fundamental, more of a 50,000 view on. I'm thinking about this student who is served and who is protected and who is taught and who is cuddled. How do you build in their brain? What steps do you need to go through? And maybe what is the first thing you need to do for a child like this to build independence? You know, I've heard you talk many times about building self-awareness, that sensory processing is a big deal, because if you feel the world is overwhelming you all the time, then you're going to want to stay and protect yourself. So I imagine there's some of that. So what kind of plan would you build?
Well, exactly the one that you have mentioned. This is what we did for the worksheet for that kid who is doing every day. So we did sensation on the face, like the two different texture lines on the face, textures along the body, and we have worked with him to tolerate the blindfold, which is really difficult, and have him walk on something like different textures to make the brain learn in a gentle way about where is my head, where are my feet, because when you look at those kids, very often they have a specific gait. They are protecting themselves. Their posture is saying, I'm not safe in the environment. So just sort of making them stand tall, either, for example, holding a ball on top of the head when they are walking on the textures. You have to change how you walk, and gradually doing that for a few minutes every day builds the image of the body, the sensation of where everything is, my hands and how do I position my head. So exercises every day This kid is blessed. He has someone who can do it twice a day. Those exercises that teach his brain about his own body and his own self. And I want to
It sounds so
mention,
easy. How long does it take to? How long did it take for that that client that you're talking
well,
about?
in fact, in a month, he was a different kid.
Oh,
And
wow.
it was very important for mom to stop the obsession of the video thing. And so how we stopped it was by this fake video that we created that made him get surprised. We say, can you give it to me? He gives it. And we immediately do strawberry and ice because we know he's going to get a bit furious. So we preempt the agitation. And then we follow that by something he likes. Do you want to go for a walk? And he loves walks. So gradually, he doesn't care as much for that thing that was the only thing that mattered for him. So building body awareness, self-awareness, enjoying the environment because we help his brain enjoy the smells and the touch and music. We play a lot of music with him. And so, in a month, he was a different kid.
I got one more question, Janalee, but have you thought of a question?
I haven't, but of course I want to tell you one thing after that.
Okay, well, my next question has to do with motivation. It feels like we've got apathy in kids. How do you get them motivated to do something that they haven't done before? I guess, is this something you do first or after you've built self-awareness? Can you walk me through the order of a typical plan for a kid who has like your 22-year-old client? What order did you do this in?
We start with being aware of yourself. You exist. You exist sitting. Your nose brings you wonderful information, and we know that we are, with Mendability, really focused on improving biochemistry in the brain, serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, all those wonderful hormones that make you feel good. It makes you feel motivated, enjoy life. And in those kids where the serotonin function is not good, typically, from what we know in research, is they produce little serotonin, which prevents dopamine to work. And dopamine is motivation and attention span and pleasure. So between all our exercises, but I mentioned music and soft touch and all kinds of tactile discoveries, we raise the biochemistry and we tell him about his body and his posture and mental image that is so essential. So first we help the brain be able, then we move towards independent actions.
I heard a story from another director who said that they had a meltdown situation, and actually twice, two stories. And I wonder if you have a story like that, Janalee, from the Mendability program with your classrooms, where a meltdown turned because of the smell component. The kid, once he was out of the meltdown, had that dopamine rush through the smell of strawberry, and ended up finishing the exercise and persevering and finishing the activity that was not a preferred activity after the meltdown. Can you explain why?
You are asking me, or you're asking
Yeah,
Janalee?
sorry, I'm asking Claudie, the guru.
Yeah, you started by talking to Janalee. So, yeah, it's so amazing. If people knew, so I hope people are really listening. When you smell something lovely, your dopamine release is 100% more. So only that. Can you imagine, even if you don't release a lot, you immediately have twice more. So you feel wonderful. This is a reward system. And so we can boost it with no side effect. And yes, the kid now is able. He's comfortable. He has his memory is functioning. His motivation is functioning because dopamine is that. I mentioned attention span, motivation, sense of pleasure, memory. It's very easy for the kid to finish something because his memory is really in place and functional.
So why wouldn't you do the strawberry and ice all the time in a classroom? Or just a strawberry, or just a smell, any smell?
Any smell that's pleasurable for the kid. And that's very important because some kids have a past experience with some smell that we may find nice and they just hate it. So as a personal example, I like lavender, but my 5 kids hate lavender because it's linked to experiences that are not pleasant. So you want to make sure that the kid likes it, but any smell, if it's pleasurable, will have the same effect of boosting.
So would you just have a scent diffuser in a room turned on all day?
That would be a wonderful idea because kids move in the room. If you're sitting at your desk in the office, I have a scent diffuser, but I really pay attention to it every time I get out of the office and come back. But the children move all the time and they get out for recess. And when they come back, there is a wonderful smell welcoming them. And they attach this nice feeling to, I love to be in the classroom. So yes, a diffuser would work. Candle burner are quite good if they are out of reach because they don't have a flame and it's really safe.
Yeah, so it has to be safe, obviously. Sorry, Janalee, I kind of hijacked this last 10 minutes.
Great training on that. You know, I think the other thing, and Claudia, I might be on the wrong track here, but what we have found as we've implemented this different sensory, our kids are willing to take that first step and begin if the person that's doing it has built some kind of a relationship with them. There's a kiddo who always smells my hair, which is really weird, but he does. That's where he gets a scent, is he smells my hair. And I know that he's connecting that with, oh, this person is someone I'm comfortable with. And it's all important. And that basis of having a good relationship with those kids and understanding what you're saying is being able to find out what works for them, because it is a little different for all kids.
Yeah,
and this is why it's so great that you've got this person dedicated to implement the sensory enrichment program in all of the classrooms and goes from classroom, because that's their one and only job, is figure out what works for that child to stimulate their brain to the next level of independence, behavior regulation, academic performance.
And I want to comment too, the fact that this person, her job is to make kids happy.
What a great job.
Yeah, that should be a profession that we talk more about and have more people do it.
For sure.
I feel like it's a good time to wrap up.
I just want to say thank you for inviting me to have a conversation with you. It's always a pleasure to hear the things that are happening with sensory enrichment. And I just think, Claudia, you're just remarkable. And I love to listen to you talk about these processes.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Janalee, for your time during the podcast too. It was immensely valuable, and I know it will help a lot of our listeners who are also dealing with restraints and trying to bring in new programs and making sure that they simulate, they have their systems in place. They spend a lot of time making sure that they address everything before they bring in this new program. We'll see you in a couple of weeks in our next episode, everybody.
Thank you.
you.
Bye.